This conference will now be recorded.
And uh, I hear what you all are saying, and if we go return to indoor dining, I will hope that we can implement a hybrid technology. Uh, we don't have Elizabeth here, so if I can pose upon you, Mary, we'll have you go first. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our endorsee for the Arlington County School Board, Mary Kadera, who has been launching a very brilliant and aggressive campaign. And I turn the floor over to her so she can tell us about it and tell us how we can get involved and how things are going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob, and thanks to all of you for inviting me to join you for your virtual lunch today. I talked with this group way back at the beginning of April, which seems like about 5 years ago now, in the life of the campaign and just the life of the world. Um, but I decided to run for school board for a couple of different reasons. One was my experience working in education for many, many years, um, and my belief that I was seeing things in other school districts and other parts of the country that I thought could benefit Arlington students and families. And so I wanted to bring some of those ideas to our community to talk about and to test out. And probably more immediately, I was concerned about our school system and others across the country in this time of pandemic, and looking at this perfect storm that I thought was brewing of community needs, and particularly student and family needs that were pandemic related, um, some budget concerns for APS that predate the pandemic, but which the pandemic certainly hasn't helped, and then equity concerns in our school system, which have been percolating for a long time, but where I think that there are opportunities for improvement, making sure that all of our students have what they need to be successful and graduate ready to be productive adults. And looking at that, those equity concerns through the lens of current events and racial and social justice across the country was another motivation for me to step forward. One of the things that I loved most about campaigning last spring and now into the summer has been the chance to talk with different people and different groups across Arlington and hear more about the varied experiences people have had with the school system and their wishes for the school system in the future. And I feel like I've had a PhD level education in Arlington Public Schools as I've listened to people and talked with folks. What has happened since the caucus is that if you are reading the papers and watching the news, you're not oblivious to the fact that school boards are under attack across the country. I use that term in the most literal sense. That there are campaigns, in many cases organized, well organized campaigns that are orchestrated by the far right in different communities and in different states that are using what is happening in our public schools as a wedge issue. And this is momentum that began with this movement to reopen schools fully 5 days a week, unmasked, everybody together, no social distancing last year in communities across the country. That was a way for, although in many cases these were described as nonpartisan groups, it has emerged in a lot of cases that these are groups that have been well funded and organized by very conservative organizations. Um, and those groups have persisted and kind of morphed into, in a lot of places, groups that are very critical of their local school boards for the way that race is talked about and handled in schools. You're seeing the headlines about critical race theory, which is really a catch-all term for a lot of different concerns about how race shows up in schooling, right? It's culturally responsive curriculum for students that recognizes the legacy of slavery and immigration issues and all kinds of other things. It is hiring practices and training practices for staff that talk about cultural competence and bias. It's showing up in a lot of different ways. So that has become, that's now kind of lumped in with the open schools movement in a lot of communities, as are concerns about LGBTQ students and staff. So I'm very concerned by what I'm seeing happen with school boards across the country, layered on top of the existing concerns about supporting our students and families during the pandemic. I'm concerned about the Delta variant, what it means for our schools as we head into the fall, layered on top of the baseline motivation that I had for wanting to serve on the school board, which is just that I think even in normal operating times, I think that there's a lot we can do to reimagine our schools and make them stronger. So there's a lot of action on multiple fronts in the school board campaign and the work ahead for the school board. And I'm a little, I would not describe myself as overwhelmed. I would describe myself actually as excited about that work. And I'm really proud to stand behind the progressive values that I know that the Democratic Party shares, that supports our students, regardless of immigration status and their gender identity and their racial identities, that looks to support our APS staff, who have been working so hard during the pandemic. I feel like, also teachers having been under attack over the past year for their positions in terms of school safety. I'm excited to stand up for our students and our staff. I'm excited to tackle the issues. I think that there are ways that APS and the school board can engage more constructively with the community, based on my own experience and my leadership in the CCPTA. And so I'm ready. I'm excited and I'm ready. And I know I will not be doing this alone, so I'm working to build relationships with APS leadership and others on the school board and various community leaders, and with you all, and looking forward to hearing any questions or observations or experiences that you'd like to share today.
Thank you. I'll take the prerogative of asking the first question. And I say this as a person who's been treasurer of the school board bond campaign for over a decade. Tell us about the school board bonds and why you support them.
That's a great question. I support, in a general kind of overarching statement, I will say that I support school board bonds because of the tremendous growth that we've seen in APS over the past decade. We went from being a small school system to now a school system projected to be 30,000 within the next decade. I think the enrollment figure the last time I looked was that our enrollment had increased 38% over the past decade. And so that's pretty extraordinary growth for any school district to go through in that amount of time. And so I am interested in bond capacity so that we can make sure that all of our students and our teachers have the right kinds of facilities and resources they need for learning. That said, I want to make sure that those bond dollars are used in the most prudent way. And I have questions about capital improvement planning. I published something at the end of June with some questions I had about the latest capital improvement plan. I'm not convinced that some of the things that were authorized in that capital improvement plan don't make good sense to me. I think that the way the capital improvement plan is developed is a little opaque to a lot of members of the community. And I think when I look at how capital improvement plans are developed in other districts, there's a much longer period of time where community members are able to weigh in on those plans. I think that there are ways that we can leverage the Facilities Advisory Council and the JFAC more fully to make sure that we're being wise investors of those dollars. As you guys know, as you know, under the current capital improvement plan that was just approved, the debt service ratio in the school district budget will go past 10% for the first time in quite some time. And given the overall budget constraints for APS, I have real concerns about that because there's not a lot of wiggle room outside of staffing costs in the APS budget. So in this pie chart, the more of it we take up with debt service on bond, the less we have for things like transportation and curriculum resources and technology and all of those other things that have to fit in pretty small wedge.
Thank you for that question. Do other people have questions of Mary? Okay, seeing none, would you just take a moment to summarize and tell us your website and so on, please?
Absolutely. Yeah, my website is maryforschoolboard.org, all one word. You'll find there information about my platform. There's a blog where I'm publishing regularly my analysis of different documents and happenings with APS, including the capital improvement analysis that I just shared in brief. My email address is mary@maryforschoolboard.org in case anybody has follow-up questions. I'm always happy to have a phone call or an email exchange or even meet for actual coffee while we still can.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining
Sure.
us. We really appreciate it, and we wish you
Sure.
good luck on your campaign.
My pleasure.
Our next guest is Elizabeth Bennett-Parker, who's Vice Mayor of the City of Alexandria, and she's seeking a House of Delegates seat that was previously occupied by Mark Levine, well, actually currently occupied by Mark Levine, who's retiring at the end of this term. And so the southernmost county precincts in Arlington County are part of her district. I personally live on the wrong side of Nash Street to have her as my delegate. I'm a Patrick Hope delegate, but the Crystal City, Farlington area are covered by her district, and we're inviting her to talk about her campaign and get her to meet some of our Arlington senior Democrats. The floor is yours, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for the invitation. And thank you to Mary for going first. I apologize, I was having some serious technical difficulties. My computer did not like this software, but we've restarted it. It seems to be working now and I can see everyone. So thank you again for your patience. I'm Elizabeth Bennett-Parker. I'm honored to be the Democratic nominee for the 45th district. That includes the precincts of Farlington, Shirlington, Abingdon, Aurora Hills, and Oak Ridge. I am currently the Vice Mayor of Alexandria. I also serve the region as the chair of the Virginia Railway Express and as a member of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission and Northern Virginia Regional Commission. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself. I was born in Alexandria and both of my parents were in the Navy, and they instilled in me a sense of service to our country and our community. My mom in particular used to always tell me that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And I've applied that to my entire career. I started a small business to fight food waste, both the negative environmental effects as well as the fact that we waste food while members of our community go hungry. Later, we merged with a nonprofit, Together We Bake, which I now co-lead, where we provide job training and other support to women returning from the criminal justice system, women experiencing homelessness, women surviving abuse, women who've recently immigrated, and more. In turn, that experience inspired me to step up and run for the Alexandria City Council in order to address many of the challenges that I saw our women facing more directly. And I'm proud of the work that we've been able to do on City Council, working with my colleagues over the past few years. We've had a number of accomplishments. We've expanded access to early childhood education, increased the supply of affordable housing, declared a climate emergency and took concrete actions. We're still taking concrete actions to cut our emissions because we know we need to do more to fight climate change and its impacts, obviously exacerbated by the report yesterday. We also amended our human rights code to include gender identity as a protected class and became, along with Arlington, some of the first jurisdictions in the Commonwealth to pass collective bargaining for our employees, just to name a few. I'm excited to get to work in Richmond and build on that, and also to bring the perspective of having served in local government to the House of Delegates. So out of 100 delegates, there are actually only 18 who've served in city or county government. None of those are from Northern Virginia, and obviously we've got some different issues here than in other parts of the state. And this is really important given the role that local government plays in people's lives and that local authority in Virginia is limited limited to what we're allowed to do by Richmond. If you've heard of the Dillon Rule, of course, that's what I'm talking about. So for example, we were only able to pass collective bargaining for our employees because the Democratic majority in the General Assembly passed enabling legislation that allowed us to do so. Similarly, we were previously unable to stop individuals from walking around I don't know what the situation looked like in Arlington, but we had folks come to our farmers market right in front of City Hall and our waterfront park walking around with assault rifles. And we would get emails saying, like, why are you allowing this? Well, until the Democratic majority in Richmond passed legislation, we were not able to stop people from doing that, even at our own seat of government, our own City Hall and public buildings and city parks. Those are obviously some partisan examples, but there's plenty of other examples of issues where I think having a local government experience is really helpful and important. So for example, one thing that I've been working on is the issue of electronic participation in electronic meetings. Obviously, I might have slightly different views on that after my experience this morning. But before last month, Virginia only allowed members of public bodies, which includes all of the volunteers who serve on our advisory commissions, whether that's Environmental Policy Advisory Commission or a Commission for Women, to participate electronically 2 times per calendar year, regardless of the number of times that a body may meet. So some bodies meet 4 times a year, other bodies meet 100 times a year or more. That didn't really make sense. So I started advocating for this in December of 2019 to the State Freedom of Information Act Council, which studies issues related to the FOIA bill and makes and bills that the General Assembly passed or introduced having to do with FOIA. Anyway, fast forward many meetings. Last month, a new law took effect that grants more flexibility for individuals to participate electronically, but this is still only allowed when there is a physical quorum of that body meeting. So you can't have a completely electronic meeting or even a hybrid meeting where some people are participating electronically, some are in person, unless there is a declared emergency, which obviously we have been. And we have seen across the board that this has increased public participation because you're removing barriers like transportation and childcare. And I know that many folks in Arlington, I know a lot of your board and commission members, I don't know if any of you are on them, have written letters in support of additional flexibility, and actually have recently learned this is one of the top 6 issues for the Northern Virginia Area Aging Network as well, one of their top asks of the General Assembly. You'd think this would be sort of easy and common sense at this point, given, again, what we've seen, but we're still hearing some resistance from legislators across the either party just over this idea. And I can keep talking about this all day long. It's one of my passion issues, but this is just one example of many. There are so many important issues at stake in the coming year or years that I'm excited to get to work on. We know that we have a lot of work to do to move our Commonwealth forward. We need to build an economy that works for all of us, especially as we focus on our recovery from COVID. That includes passing paid family and medical leave for all of our workers and continuing to increase the minimum wage. We need equitable educational opportunities for all of our students, including accessible, quality early childhood education starting from birth, not only to set our children up for success, but to support working families. And I look forward to working with Mary on that. And we know we have a lot more work to do to continue to increase access to healthcare, fight climate change, reform our criminal justice system, protect access to voting, and so much more. We all know that we have an election every year in Virginia, and I know that we all thought last year was the most important election year, and it certainly was, but now this is the most important election year. We know we have folks who got engaged after the election of he who shall not be named, who, now that he's not our president anymore, think that our work here is done. But we all know that's not the case. We're at risk of having him as our governor in the form of Glenn Youngkin, and our Democratic majority in the House of Delegates is up for grabs as well. And they've accomplished so much in such a short period of time. It's not only important to keep the majority, but it's important to keep all 55 seats because it determines the party split in our House committees. So right now we have 13 Democrats and 9 Republicans on each committee. If we keep the majority, but even lose a couple House seats, those numbers change. And so you have a slimmer margin of getting things out of committee into the House. So it's really important to not only keep the majority, but to keep all the seats we have and ideally pick up some more too. So I'll be working hard this summer and fall to make sure we do that, and look forward to working with all of you to that end as well, and happy to answer any questions.
How do you see the caucuses functioning? Obviously, it is important to maintain a large majority, and some of our members are in very swing districts. So what is your approach toward, if you were elected, toward being active in your caucus and managing those tensions?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not technically a member of the caucus yet, but still, as a Democratic nominee, I think it's important for me to support the caucus and to support my hopefully future colleagues. I do have a Republican opponent. I think all of the Arlington delegates or, in my case, candidate folks who represent Arlington have Republican opponents, but certainly think it's important to, in addition to focusing on my own race, to go out and knock doors in other districts and, hopefully donate to some of those candidates as well. And then I think going forward, sort of your question was about relationships and managing tensions. And I guess I think, ultimately at the end of the day, we're all Democrats. And I think, it's important that we all work together. I'm starting to try to build some of those relationships now. So that I can hit the ground running, assuming I'm elected in January. And yeah, I think it's important to meet people where they are and find common grounds, no matter really your party, because we're gonna have to work with the Republicans in Richmond too.
Does anyone else have a question for Elizabeth? Yes, Herschel.
Oh, you're on mute.
I have two issues that I'd like at some point to get together on. One is I'm part of the Northern Virginia Aging Network, and I don't know whether you've had any contact with people involved with that, but it involves all the commissions on aging and staffs in Northern Virginia jurisdictions. And one of our issues this year is open meetings. So you seem to be more of an expert, actually, perhaps than on the issue and the things in the way of changing that law. So I'd like to get together on that. The other issue, which you may want to comment on, that I'm involved with is broadband. Most of the money being spent and the proposal for the hundreds of millions of dollars seem to be for rural wiring. And Arlington and Alexandria have lots of areas that aren't wired. And if they are wired, the two Verizon and Comcast are kind of in the way of expanding the use of, for example, in Arlington, the Arlington government has a backbone that it uses for the government and the schools in the government, and could be used in some of the areas. So anyway, if you have any comments on broadband.
Yes, definitely. Obviously, we've seen the importance of broadband over the past year and a half, and we know that it's not just rural areas that have connectivity issues. We have digital divides in urban areas like Arlington and Alexandria, and that's incredibly important for helping kids connect to school when it's, hopefully it will not be offline or online, but as well as small businesses and others. I know that Arlington similarly has I don't think we're as far along as Arlington from my understanding, but we're building out a municipal fiber as well, and there will be an extra sort of the ability to bring the private sector into that as well to enhance and encourage competition to Comcast. And I know we in Alexandria allocated some of our local recovery funding to our library to help purchase more like mobile hotspots so that they can actually lend them. My understanding is that Arlington already does that, I think, but certainly supportive of those efforts, but also I know we did sort of Wi-Fi in parks and that sort of thing, but then also certainly, yes, if we can get some of the state recovery dollars and efforts to enhance and help us with our digital divide issues in Northern Virginia, I think that would be important as well.
Are there other questions for Elizabeth? Patricia.
Yes, great. Hi. I have a couple passion issues that I have helped work on year after year, and wonder what your positions are on the two. One is the national popular vote, which I think is the answer to never having another president who wasn't elected by the people. and the other is MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying. And I know Herschel is another one of those who's on that committee to try and get it passed. So those are my two issues.
Yep, definitely. So I'm supportive of both of those things. I actually have a meeting with the National Popular Vote Compact folks, I think the Virginia folks, tomorrow maybe. And then, yeah, actually the medical assisted issue came up at the doors a lot for me, which was interesting. And yeah, certainly supportive of that as well.
Any further questions for Elizabeth? Okay, seeing none, do you want to just take a minute to summarize and tell us your website and so on?
Sure, thank you. So my website is elizabethfordelegate.com, and that's with the word for spelled out. And Elizabeth with Z, so elizabethfordelegate.com. My email is similarly elizabethfordelegate@gmail.com. And if you're on social media, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EBP4VA.
Okay, well, we want to really thank you for taking the time, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. I think our technology is sort of on the fritz today a little bit. We seem to have been having more problems than usual, and really do appreciate the candidates stopping by. Our third guest today is not a candidate, but is the former deputy chair of ACDC, and is currently serving as vice chair of the outreach committee of the state party. And many of you know him from his work on Beyond Arlington. So I give the floor to Steve Baker.
Thank you so much for having me today. And go figure that I needed to come to this lunch to find out what was happening with Governor Cuomo and the infrastructure bill. Always something exciting in the world of politics. Bob asked me to speak a little bit about the state of our party and outreach. So I'm going to go back a little bit and give a little bit of history, and then kind of talk about where I think we are now, and a couple of the things that I think are important for us to look to in the near future. And I do see my good friend Margot Horner is here as well. And it was a little bit over 5 years ago that Margot and I had just returned from the 2016 Democratic National Convention, filled with hope of having just nominated Hillary Clinton, the first woman to be a major party nominee for the office of president. I think I'll speak for myself at least, that I was cautiously optimistic, not overly, but certainly cautiously optimistic and hopeful that we would do well in that election. I had no illusions about the divided nature of our nation and the two-party system. Hillary's first rally in Market Square in Alexandria was on the heels of her testimony on the Benghazi the Benghazi disaster. So clearly we were in a divided nation. But as bad as I thought that our previous administration would be, it ended up so much worse than I had ever imagined. Right out of the box was the Paris Climate Agreement and the Muslim ban. We struggled with the issue of the wall for 4 years. We absolutely were helpless as major parts of our government were dismantled. One of my good friends and one of the volunteers for Beyond Arlington last year was former State Department, and she said it would take decades to rebuild the State Department. So the destruction that has been wrought on our institutions and our democracy has been devastating. And of course, all that ended up with, you know, a lot of campaign fraud on the other side, and what I would say is nothing less than an attempted coup, which we are still dealing with today, and the threat of it happening again. The good news is that in light of that previous administration and its election, so many people came out and joined the Arlington Democrats. I think it was December 2016, we had our first volunteer open house, and I think close to 200 people signed up for that first event. So an enormous outpouring of support and help came from the community. We also saw the Indivisible Manifesto was published around that time, and groups outside the party sprung up all over the place. Many of them still exist. Many of them, I think we work with or try to work with as a party. Many continue to work on their own. So an enormous outpouring. Every day was a campaign day. I know when I joined Arlington Democrats, and this might have only been my perception, but I felt it was more of a, we met all year round and we did things all year round, but we were really sort of busy seasonally in the summer when the campaigns got going. And the winter I always saw as some time off, but not under the last 4 years. Every single day was a crisis. Every single day was an imperative. Every single day we had important work to do, and we did accomplish so much in that time. Many of you might recall, and I think Bob mentioned that I was a chair. Jill made me chair of a group called Beyond Arlington. Very grateful for her doing that. I'd actually started leading it the previous year, but happy that it was made a standing committee and made official. We sought to recruit volunteers within Arlington and to direct them to other places in Virginia that were almost democratic, but probably needed a little bit of help to get there. Hopefully we were wise in our selection of candidates, and hopefully we were able to recruit enough volunteers to make some type of difference. We know that combined, all those who helped in so many different ways did make the difference, and people in those communities. Many of them are urban, suburban communities, did pitch in and help flip the necessary number of seats. Where were we in 2017? I think we flipped 15 seats. And then in 2019, we flipped the remaining number that we needed, the last 5 or 6 seats. And since that time, have had a majority in the House of Delegates, which has made enormous strides in making Virginia fundamentally a different place than it was prior to Democratic control of the General Assembly. And I would add the first state in the South to do so, to get rid of so many things. The trap laws, the voting restrictions, to adopt common sense gun safety, to get rid of the death penalty. So many great strides that we've made. So where does that put us right now? Today, I think people are exhausted. They have worked so hard the last 4 years, and it didn't happen overnight. In 2017, if you just opened the door, the volunteers came in, and each successive year after that, it was a little bit harder and harder to recruit volunteers. So each and every year, it's gotten a little more difficult. Last year, including with the pandemic, it was tough to get people to make phone calls. We did not do canvassing till the end of the season, and then we did just a little bit of knockless lit drop. But it was definitely a lot harder with the pandemic to get people participating. I think postcards were clearly the winner in 2020. But we're in a place right now where, as Elizabeth pointed this out, we have the most important election ahead of us. This is our first time to defend our Democratic majority in the House of Delegates. And it is extremely important that we hang on to each and every seat that we won in the previous 2 cycles. The 6 seats that represent our majority, our narrowest wins to gain this majority, comprise less than 5,100 votes. I think it's 5,080 votes, something like that. Nancy Guy being the closest race. On election night, evidence said that she won by 20-some votes, and in the recount, that became 41 votes. So a really, really close race. And there are a couple more, Alex Askew, and I think Josh Cole, were somewhere in the 500-600 range. A lot of really, really close races, and it's just so imperative that as exhausted as I know people are, and I think primarily it's just emotional exhaustion from the trauma of the previous administration. We really need people to stay motivated, stay engaged, and keep doing the great things that they're doing. So, as Bob mentioned, I'm deputy chair of the outreach committee. I think that is one of the key pathways going forward for us to keep people engaged, to make sure that we keep the party a big tent party, make sure that we embrace everyone in our community, regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity. Keep the party open and welcoming to everyone, and make sure there's a role where everyone can participate. And by keeping the Big Ten party, we'll be able to keep people engaged. I think we will struggle some with volunteer drop-off. I think we're seeing it this summer. We've got to solve for that somehow, and we're going to have to prioritize what are the most important activities that we need to do. What are the resources we have, and how do we deploy them to best help our candidates and make sure our local delegation gets elected, and make sure we preserve a lot of these seats around the Commonwealth that we've just had for 1 or 2 sessions. Bob, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the audience might have.
Sure. Thank you so much for your remarks, Steve. Does anyone have a question for Steve from our audience? Okay, well, why don't I start off the discussion? Steve, you're a member of both the 8th District Committee and the State Central Committee, as well as ACDC and its steering committee. How do you view the different roles of the different levels of the party?
Well, I think our local committees are constituent components of the state Democratic Party. The state party plan, as you know, says that anyone who believes in the principles of the Democratic Party is a member of the Democratic Party of Virginia. And our local committees, our city and county committees, are the local organizing constituents of those groups of people. And they are tasked with, helping organize methods of nomination, turning out voters in their precincts, in their cities and counties, to vote in primaries and to come back out in the general election and help Democrats get elected.
Any other questions for Steve?
Also,
Steve, go ahead.
And I see my good friend Maureen Markham, fellow 8th District member, is here as well. Maureen, always good to see you.
Yeah, we should point out that Margot, who needs no introduction, is chair of the 8th District Committee.
And I did mention Margot previously, so yeah, good to see Margot.
Yeah.
It's good to see all my friends, Herschel, Mark, everybody, Pat, Steve.
Yeah, we're a tight-knit group. Usually we get better turnout than this, but as I mentioned before, Delegate Patrick Hope is in special session. They convened at 11 o'clock today. They somehow scheduled today's meeting to wipe out the lunch hour for them. So he sends his regrets. Are there any further questions for Steve or anything else someone who wants to raise? Mark has his hand half up. Mark Teal.
Yeah, I know we've talked before, but you mentioned the lack of enthusiasm this year, and I've heard it and seen it from a lot of other people as well. And it's frightening to me how many people still don't realize that Virginia has elections every year. And with with the reduction in people volunteering, how can we get that word out? What are we going to do to reach all these people who don't realize there's an election? I'm really, really concerned about that, and I don't know the best ways to do that.
So great question, and I think that's exactly where we are right now, and exactly what we need to be working on. And certainly within the party, there's no lack of enthusiasm. I think there's just exhaustion. As you go out and talk to voters, there's a lot of folks that just don't know, like you say, that we have an election every year and how important each and every one is. Part of that is, I think, we just need to keep telling them over and over again, look, this is what democratic government has brought to you, and show them, the voting rights, and show them, the education funding and the Medicaid expansion and all the great things that they have that help get them through this pandemic, that were it not for Democratic leadership, they would not have. So that's part of it. And to get that done, making sure we have people on the doors. Right now there is canvassing. I don't know if the Delta variant is going to interfere with that between now and November. Possibly it could, but there's all the campaigns are definitely putting volunteers out there to knock on doors. The targets are great. There's strong Democrats or leaning Democrats and low propensity voters. And those leaning Dems and low propensity voters are the areas where you can really have a good conversation about the things I just said, all the great things we've done as our Democratic leaders have done to bring positive change to the state. So making sure we have enough people knocking on those doors, I think is, yours and mine and, everyone else here is our task for the summer. And the way we do that, if you're in charge of those things, I think quite often we rely a little too much on sending out an email or, putting up a Facebook event, and you need to do all those things. But people step up when you make a personal appeal to them. So I think we need to call our volunteers and talk to them same way we talk to voters when we knock on the doors, and just let them know, look, we need you for a shift this weekend. Here's a district that I lean to sort of the outside districts a little bit still, although I have knocked this summer in Arlington, first time in 4 years. So it was great to knock on doors in Arlington. I will say, as a side note, when I knocked on doors this year in Arlington, I was startled at how little I had to walk to get to 40 different doors. I think I went down one street 2 blocks, went over one, and back up two blocks. And at the end of that, I knocked on 40 doors. Where when you're in Chesterfield County, I mean, you might get 4 miles under your belt before you get 40 doors. So it was definitely a pleasure knocking on doors here, but making sure we get the volunteers to get out there and knock on those doors and talk to voters, and calling them and making those personal appeals is critical to maintaining this majority. And the Republicans are motivated. The last 2 cycles, they've been motivated. You know, voter turnout's been really high, and we patted ourselves on the back for that, as we should. We worked hard and we turned out a lot of Democrats, but the other side turned out a lot of people too. They just didn't do as good a job as we did. And I think they're motivated this year. So it's not a year where we can let down and not be motivated. We've got to make sure our people get out there and get the voters out. I will say one other thing, because of all the election reform that we have had, you know, GOTV is not a 4-day event anymore. It's not about election day so much. We have 6 weeks of vote harvesting we can do just each and every week to make sure that we get people out to vote. If they didn't vote, you know, we got another shot at them. Well, you really need to go vote. So to take full advantage of that 6-week plus period of voting, like we did last year and the other side didn't, I think that's one of our advantages. So Mark, thank you so much for that really good question.
I would point out that you know, it works both ways, that even though they didn't happen to do that in 2020, going forward, and I think this is true nationwide, they will maximize the voting laws, whatever they are on the books, to their advantage. And the Republicans will certainly try to do whatever they can to win in Virginia in 2021 and nationwide in 2022.
And Bob, when you say that, are you saying that Republicans will come out and vote more than they did last year, or that they'll work harder to suppress the vote? And
no, I think that they will work hard to get their people out. And you know, hypocritically, they're perfectly capable of promoting early voting in Virginia and trying to outlaw it in Texas and Arizona at the same time. I keep an eye on my precinct very carefully,
yeah.
And my Republican counterpart was out there knocking on doors and everything last year, and I'm sure he will be this year. And I fully expect that they will promote early voting and absentee voting and everything else to their people in Arlington, no matter what position the Texas legislature or the Arizona legislature takes.
And I'll just, you know, add so the last couple of cycles I've worked in Chesterfield and Henrico on election day, and you could see it, that the other side really did work, get their people out on, in this case, on election day. But on the gun issue, on abortion, they really got traction with those sort of hot button issues. And with respect to guns, I mean, it's intimidating. The more rural Virginia you get, and that's probably not Henrico Chesterfield, but you get those gun folks out there, and it's intimidating to our voters. So we need to work to get our people out there for sure.
Well, there's also go ahead. Yes, please.
Oh, Bob, can you hear me?
Yes, Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble with my camera. First of all, I apologize for coming late, and I'm going to have to leave because I've got a class coming up. But I just wanted to make a comment, and in short, that was basically to thank Steve. Uh, I remember years and years ago when I was just sort of starting to get involved in some precinct things, hauling things with Steve. I mean, he's been doing this for so long, and I don't think gets full credit for what he does. I mean, there are others on this call. I know Margot, Maureen, Mark, Herschel, Bob, yourself have all been, in the weeds for a long time doing this. But since Steve's our speaker, I want to just give him a special shout out. He's an unsung hero. Done a lot of work, and I don't think he's gotten near as much credit as is due. So that's all I had to add.
Thank you, Derek. That's well said. Well said and well deserved.
Derek, always great to hear you, Derek. You're a good friend, and I always enjoy working with you and Inta. And you're right. Look, I stand on the shoulders of giants. People like Bob and Maureen and Margot and us. So many great people that have gone before us. Gene Marshall Crawford, my dear friend, I miss every day, and so many good folks. So, and it's a pleasure to do the work.
Thank you.
Herschel, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I don't want to add to the perceived burden, but we have a good chance of having a House of Delegates election next year because we're running on the old districts now, and whichever side loses if we keep the House of Delegates, the Republicans will go into court and say we got to have an election next year. And if we, God forbid, should lose the House of Delegates, the Democrats would certainly go in and say we've got to have an election next year. So either way, we can expect 3 straight House of Delegate elections. So that's going to be tough when people are concentrating on the House of Representatives and the Senate to remind them there's a local or a Virginia election.
Right, but the moral of the story is please keep your election lawyers well fed and well funded, as well as your candidates.
That's a great point, Herschel, and hope we make it through this year. And then you're exactly right. Redistricting throws us a whole nother curve. If we can survive redistricting, I think there are bright days in our future. But I'm hoping my good friend Abigail Spanberger gets somewhat protected by redistricting. Don't know that that'll happen. If they asked me to draw her district, I would lop off Culpeper and Nottoway and give her a little bit of Richmond, but we'll see what happens in the real process. And that might come to the expense of the 5th district, but we'll hopefully our House of Delegate districts are improved in that process as well. We'll just wait and see.
And any other comments for the good of the order? Okay, well, we want to thank you, Steve, so much for taking the time joining us. I know you have on occasion joined us before, even as a non-speaker participant, and you're welcome to come back any time. The monthly meetings are open to all senior Democrats. Again, we're going to meet virtually next month and in October, and we're going to watch the CDC guidance and so on. And I hope in the meantime, everybody stays healthy, well, and productive on the campaign trails. So thank you for joining us, and we're going to adjourn today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank